Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The sun hung low over the dusty skyline of Nsukka as Obina's convoy rolled slowly through the narrow, bustling streets of the rural community. His black SUV glinted under the sun, a symbol of wealth and status that stood in stark contrast to the tattered roofs and barefoot children watching him pass. He wasn't supposed to be here personally. His foundation often handled such visits, but something in him had pulled him to this place. It wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the politics. It was the gnawing emptiness inside him that had only grown louder in recent months, echoing with flashes of things he couldn't fully remember. He stepped out of the vehicle with quiet confidence, flanked by aides and photographers. But the moment his eyes landed on a young girl seated on a wooden bench near the edge of the town square, his world stopped. She was no different from the others at first glance, dark-skinned, slim, with her hair tied back in a neat bun. But what seized his heart was the silver bracelet glinting on her wrist, worn loosely, almost carelessly. His chest tightened. His fingers trembled slightly. That bracelet. He had only ever given it to one person in his life. Obina stood still as a statue, heart thudding violently in his chest, while his eyes locked onto the girl. She looked up at him, curious but unbothered, then smiled faintly, unknowingly branding her face into his soul. That smile, it was hauntingly familiar. For a fleeting second, he saw another face layered over hers. Youthful, soft-spoken, fearless. Amaka. The name punched through his subconscious, like a wave breaking against the rocks. The past he had spent decades trying to understand stirred violently within him. But just as quickly, his security detail interrupted his days, nudging him toward the waiting crowd for speeches and handshakes. Obina obeyed, but his attention remained tethered to the girl in the distance. Even as he smiled for the cameras and gave motivational words to youth groups, his eyes kept drifting back. She was gone by the time he finished. The bench empty. The moment passed, but the damage was done. Something had been awakened. That night, back in his luxurious Lagos mansion, Obina sat in his study with a tumbler of whiskey untouched beside him. The city glittered through the window, but he didn't see it. His mind replayed the girl's smile, the bracelet, the sudden wave of nausea that overtook him when he remembered what that bracelet had once meant. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a photo album he hadn't touched in over 15 years. Dust clung to its edges like forgotten pain. The photos inside were neatly arranged, almost too perfect, mostly political fundraisers, weddings, ribbon cuttings. Yet no photo of her. Why can't I remember her face clearly? He thought. But he could remember the warmth of a hidden kiss in the university dorm hallway. He could remember a song, a touch, a name on the edge of his lips. He reached for the album's final page and saw it, the matching bracelet, tucked in an old photo of himself, grinning like a boy in love. His chest burned. He wasn't just remembering her. He was remembering what he had lost. Obina barely slept. Dreams clashed with nightmares, scattered visions of laughter by a riverside, a girl's hand reaching for his, a cold hospital bed, then silence. At dawn, he went jogging through his estate grounds, but instead of finding clarity, he found more questions. Who was she? Why did that girl's face haunt him so much? More importantly, why did he feel guilty? As though he had failed someone deeply, betrayed a promise he never knew he made. Back inside, he stormed his personal archives. Shelves of documents, university records, photo albums, even digital files were combed through. He typed the name Amaka into a dusty university yearbook PDF. Several results popped up, but none had photos, just names. He clicked each one, hoping for something, anything. Then one image opened, a candid photo taken at the university's Independence Day Festival. In the corner, blurred but unmistakable, was a girl dancing. Her smile was wide. She wore a silver bracelet. Just then, the door creaked open. Ngozi, his mother, entered, regal as ever in her flowing purple lace, with a stony expression that always seemed to preempt confrontation. "You didn't sleep," she said, more a statement than a question. Obina didn't look up. "Do you remember Amaka?" he asked quietly. For a fraction of a second, her face flickered with something. Panic, perhaps. But it vanished beneath her practiced calm. "Amaka," she repeated. "That name doesn't sound familiar. Should I?" Obinna watched her carefully, but said nothing. Ngozi moved closer and shut the album on the desk. "You're tired, Obinna. The past is dangerous for men like you. People will use it to ruin you." But her voice trembled slightly at the edges. Obinna said nothing. The silence between them swelled. When she left, he reopened the book. The bracelet shimmered in the photo like a ghost. For the first time in decades, Obinna realized something terrifying. His past had been stolen from him. Later that day, as he sat by the poolside, his personal assistant brought news about the girl from the rural event, Chisholm. She had signed up for a youth program sponsored by the Obinna Foundation and left a contact number. Obinna took the slip of paper with shaking fingers. Chisholm. Her name was Chisholm. Something about it sounded poetic, prophetic even. He stared at the name for a long time, a deep-rooted sense of déjà vu building inside him. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, about to dive into a truth that would change everything. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what her connection was. But he knew she was tied to something he had forgotten or was forced to forget. The name, the smile, the bracelet, it wasn't coincidence. It was a calling. And for the first time in a long time, Obinna decided he would answer it. The community of Umadim buzzed quietly with the usual hum of early morning life. Roosters crowing, buckets clanging at the borehole, mothers sweeping dirt paths in front of their homes. Chisholm, with her long skirt hitched just above her ankles and her satchel slung over one shoulder, skipped over puddles as she made her way back from the town library. Her fingers toyed with the silver bracelet on her wrist, an old thing her mother gave her on her 15th birthday. "Your father gave this to someone very special," her mother had whispered back then. "And now it belongs to you." She didn't ask many questions at the time. Her mother rarely spoke of her past. The name of her father had never been clearly given, just shadows of a man who once lived, then disappeared like morning mist. Chisholm only knew that her mother raised her alone, scraping a living through tailoring and teaching part-time in a local primary school. Amaka sat on the veranda when Chisholm arrived home. Her once lush skin now held the tiredness of a woman who'd lived 3 lifetimes of sorrow. Her eyes lit up when she saw her daughter, though the smile didn't reach full brightness. "He didn't tell me he was that tall," Chisholm teased, dropping her bag beside her. "The man from the charity event. He looked like a walking billboard." Amaka froze slightly. "What man?" she asked, her voice slow. "The main sponsor," Chisholm replied, casually sitting beside her. "Obinna something. He kept staring at me, like I reminded him of someone." The cup in Amaka's hand trembled. She coughed to disguise it. "Don't be silly," she said softly, eyes darting away. But deep inside, her soul rattled. That name, Obinna, was a name she had buried in her bones, one that still tasted like honey and poison all at once. Later that night, after Chisholm had gone to bed, Amaka went to the old wooden box under her bed. Inside was a collection of sealed letters, faded photographs, and one half-torn ultrasound scan. She pulled out the last photo she had of Obinna, taken in front of a university library. He was smiling, arms wrapped around her waist, head resting on hers. She touched his face with shaking fingers. "God, please let him not remember," she whispered, tears clouding her eyes. She had suffered enough. Her daughter had suffered enough. The world she'd escaped was too dangerous to return to. Ngozi's threats were not mere words. They were weapons. And if Obinna remembered, if he found her, Amaka feared it wouldn't just reopen wounds. It might tear apart everything she had built to protect her daughter from the past. The past unfolded like an old film reel as Obinna sat by his bedroom window, staring at the city below, but seeing none of it. The year was 2004, in the vivid memory lodged deep in his bones. The first time he saw Amaka on campus, dancing with her friends near the chemistry department during orientation week. She wasn't like the others. She had no flashy makeup, no designer shoes. She wore plain clothes and carried books pressed to her chest like they were gold. but her laughter carried across the lawn like a melody. It had pulled him in, and for the first time in his privileged but suffocating life, he had felt truly seen. Their love had not been immediate, but once it began, it burned with the kind of fire no storm could put out. Or so he thought. Amaka was the daughter of a local teacher. Obinna was the heir to one of Nigeria's largest conglomerates. His mother, Ngozi, had tolerated the romance until she realized Amaka wasn't just a fling. She was the girl Obinna wanted to marry. The confrontation came hard and fast. Ngozi had barged into their off-campus apartment one rainy evening, unannounced, dressed in a silk wrapper and fury. She slapped Amaka across the face before she could even speak. "You witch! You gold-digging parasite!" she had screamed. Obinna tried to shield Amaka, begged his mother to leave, but the damage had already begun. Ngozi reported Amaka to the school board under false accusations, used her connections to have her removed from the work-study program, and pressured Obinna's father to threaten to cut off his tuition and inheritance. Obinna rebelled. He packed a single bag, left his mansion in Banana Island, and fled back to Enugu, where Amaka was hiding. For 3 weeks, they lived in a cheap guest house, feeding on fried yam and dreams. And then it happened, the car crash. They were on a bike, late for a bus that would take them to her uncle's house in Owerri. The bike skidded off the road on a slippery bend, and Obinna hit his head hard against a street sign. He lost consciousness before Amaka's scream could finish escaping her throat. The hospital stay was the beginning of the end. Obinna slipped into a coma, and Amaka never left his side for 10 days. She held his hand, whispered prayers, refused food, until Ngozi arrived. Clad in full black lace, she walked in like a widow mourning a son not yet dead. Her eyes met Amaka's and spat venom. "You've killed him," she hissed. "Now leave before you bury him too." The nurses tried to intervene, but Ngozi bribed the hospital management and threatened to arrest Amaka for attempted murder. Shaking, starved, and 3 weeks pregnant, Amaka was forced to leave under security escort. She left no note, no number, just a bracelet in Obinna's side drawer and a whisper that she would never forget him. When Obinna eventually woke up 2 months later, his mind was a fog. He didn't remember the bike, the girl, the dreams. Ngozi told him it had all been a phase, something his brain made up. And in that hospital room, a new version of Obinna was born. Brilliant, obedient, emotionally numb. Amaka returned to Umidum with nothing but the baby in her womb, and a soul too bruised to carry anything else. She stayed with her late father's sister, Mama Neka, who welcomed her with quiet kindness and a room at the back of her bungalow. Amaka barely spoke for weeks. Her appetite came and went, and some nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering if Obinna had survived. She listened to the news religiously, but his name was never mentioned. She dared not call. She had no money, and even if she did, the fear of Ngozi's threat haunted her. "If you ever come near my son again, I will make you disappear," Ngozi had whispered while gripping her arm so hard it left a bruise. So Amaka did what wounded women do. She survived. She learned to stitch clothes from a local tailor, saved every naira she could. And when Chisholm was born on a stormy September night, Amaka cried not for joy, but for fear. She held her baby like a shield, whispering that no harm would ever come to her. And from that day forward, she lived only for her child. Ngozi, meanwhile, curated a different version of the truth for her recovering son. After flying Obinna to the UK for advanced neurological care, she wove a narrative that painted Amaka as the reason for his downfall. She told him Amaka was a desperate girl who drugged and distracted him, leading to the crash. That she fled the country with stolen money. That she was a mistake from a forgotten chapter. At first, Obinna's recovery was slow. He struggled with names, flinched at certain sounds, and often dreamt of a girl by a riverside, though no one could explain what it meant. Ngozi dismissed the dreams as delusions. With time, Obinna grew into the version she designed, disciplined, sharp-witted, emotionally repressed, and utterly focused on wealth, not women. And when he turned 30, Ngozi handpicked Ifunanya, beautiful, politically connected, and most importantly, submissive to the elite lifestyle Ngozi had carved out for her son. Amaka never reached out. Not once. Not when Obinna returned to Nigeria. Not when his face began to appear on magazine covers. And not even when she saw him on the news shaking hands with presidents. She watched from her television at the corner of their sitting room, Chisholm beside her, asking questions she couldn't answer. Amaka had sworn to protect her daughter from that world. And she feared that if she ever broke that silence, she would not only invite Ngozi's wrath again, but risk Chisholm being rejected by her father, or worse, used as a pawn. So she tucked away every memory, burned the old letters, hid the photographs, and the bracelet. She gave that to Chisholm on her 15th birthday, lying that it was from a good man who once protected them. But he's gone now, she had whispered, and he's never coming back. Obinna stood before the tall glass window of his private office tower in Victoria Island, looking out but seeing nothing but foggy recollections. He had scheduled no meetings that morning, canceled 2 interviews, and barely answered his phone. His mind had become a war zone of emotions, fragments of memories breaking past the dam his mother had built in his brain. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl, Chisholm, her face, her bracelet, that bracelet. He had tried brushing it off, blaming coincidence, but when he called one of his old university friends to ask about Amaka, the silence on the other end was deafening. "Bro, I thought your mother said that girl died," the friend had asked, shocked. Obinna froze. "Died," he echoed. "Who said she died?" The friend went quiet again, then mumbled, "Your mom told us during your coma that the girl disappeared. She said the family didn't want drama, and you wouldn't even remember her." Obinna ended the call with his heart racing and his palms sweating. That wasn't a coincidence. That was cover-up. Later that evening, Ifeanyi returned home to find Obinna rifling through old documents in the guest room. He had ripped open old cardboard boxes and was now going through them one by one. "What are you looking for?" she asked, standing at the doorway with her arms folded. "My past," Obinna replied simply. "Something isn't right." Ifeanyi raised a brow. "Your past is dead. What do you need it for?" Her tone was cold, annoyed. But Obinna wasn't listening. He found a brown envelope sealed and marked with the name UD General Hospital, 2004. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was his discharge letter. It mentioned a young woman named Miss Amaka Ease as the first person who brought him in. He turned pale. That name, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't made up. It was real. And suddenly, he realized he had been lied to. Not just once, but systematically. Not just by his mother, but by everyone who stayed silent while a piece of him was erased. Obinna sat in his car that night, parked on a quiet street far from the city noise. He stared at the stars and tried to understand why it hurt so much. He had been a victim of manipulation, a pawn in his mother's game. And now, a stranger had walked into his life, wearing a bracelet that brought back everything. Was she my daughter? The thought chilled him. He didn't know. Not yet. But he intended to find out. Not for revenge. Not even for closure. But because something inside him, something more powerful than money, pride, or memory, was beginning to stir. And that something whispered one word over and over, Amaka. The next morning, Obinna instructed his assistant to arrange a discreet visit to Umidum. "Make sure no one knows," he said. "Not even my mother." He didn't know exactly what he was searching for, but he knew he needed to see the girl again, the one whose eyes mirrored a past he couldn't erase, and whose bracelet had awakened memories buried for nearly 2 decades. Dressed in a casual shirt and jeans, without the usual entourage or security detail, he made his way into the town under the guise of inspecting the Obinna Foundation's local initiatives. It was late afternoon when he finally saw her again, standing near the community library, speaking with a group of young children. Her presence was effortless, magnetic. She didn't see him at first, but he stood there quietly, watching. When she finally turned, their eyes locked, and Obinna stepped forward with a mix of awe and disbelief. "That bracelet, where did you get it?" he asked without preamble. Chisholm tilted her head slightly, confused by the urgency in his tone. "It was my mum's," she replied casually. "She gave it to me on my 15th birthday. Why?" Obinna's heart skipped. Do you know where she got it from? He pressed. Chisholm shrugged. She never really said. Just that it belonged to someone she once loved. There was something about the way she said it, the unbothered innocence, that twisted something deep in his gut. What's your mother's name? He asked, his voice hoarse. Amaka, Chisholm replied without hesitation. That name hit him like a blow to the chest. It confirmed what his heart already knew. He stood frozen for a long second before composing himself. You look a lot like someone I knew a long time ago, he said, his voice softer now. Chisholm smiled politely, unaware of the storm raging behind his eyes. Maybe you knew my dad, she joked. I never met him, though. Obinna forced a smile, but didn't answer. He turned to leave, but her voice followed him. Wait, have we met before? She asked. He paused, still facing away. Not yet, he whispered. But I think we will. That night, Obinna barely spoke to anyone. He shut himself in his study and paced the room like a man possessed. Amaka had a child, his child. There was no other explanation. She had named her Chisholm, a name that sounded like a hidden plea, like God is with me. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think. He wanted to run to Amaka that very night, demand the truth, demand answers. But part of him hesitated. What if she hated him? What if she still believed the lies his mother spread? He sat down at his desk and wrote one word on a blank sheet of paper. Why? Why had she left? Why hadn't she tried to find him when he came back? Why had his own mother hidden this life from him? The questions burned in his brain like wildfire. And yet in the center of it all was the girl with the bracelet, his daughter. And he had no idea what to do next. Obinna couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, dressed simply in a plain shirt and trousers, he returned to Umidum. This time, he didn't stop at the library or any of the Foundation's offices. He followed Chisholm at a distance, watching her enter a narrow path that led into the inner quarters of the town. The air smelled of firewood and red earth. She disappeared behind a rusted metal gate and into a modest bungalow surrounded by pawpaw trees and flowering shrubs. Obinna waited until evening. He returned, parked his car far from sight, and approached the house alone. His fingers trembled as he raised them to knock on the door. It creaked open, and there she stood, Amaka, older, leaner, her hair now wrapped in a scarf. But her eyes, those were the same. Her lips parted, her body froze, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The air between them was dense with history, regret, and something even deeper, pain that had never been given permission to heal. What are you doing here? Amaka's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was firm. You should leave. Now. Obinna took a breath. I saw her, he said. Chisholm. She's mine, isn't she? Amaka's eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with devastation. You don't get to ask that, she said sharply. Not after 20 years. Obinna stepped forward, desperate. I didn't know Amaka. I swear I didn't know. My mother, she lied to me. She told me you ran away. She erased you. I didn't even remember your name until I saw the bracelet. Amaka turned away, swallowing hard. You didn't look for me, she said. You just accepted whatever she fed you. You forgot me, Obinna. You forgot us. Her voice cracked at the end. Obinna felt a sharp ache ripple through his chest. I didn't forget you, he said. I forgot myself. But I'm here now. I need the truth. Please. Amaka stared at him for a long, painful moment. Then, without a word, she shut the door. Obinna stood there, fists clenched, heart sinking. From inside, he heard the sound of a chair scraping the floor and a sob that she tried hard to suppress. But she didn't open the door again. He waited. Minutes passed. An hour. Then, defeated, he walked back to his car, unaware that someone had been watching him from a nearby corner. A short, elderly woman standing in the shadows, wrapped in a shawl. Her eyes narrowed with recognition and fury. Ngozi. She had followed him. She had seen it all. And now, the one truth she buried 2 decades ago was threatening to erupt. And Ngozi was prepared to go to war all over again to protect the legacy she had built, even if it meant destroying Amaka a second time. The tension in the mansion was thick enough to choke on. Ifeanyi stood at the balcony, glass of wine in hand, watching Obina's car pull in without a word of warning. He had disappeared the entire day, no calls, no texts. She didn't need a psychic to know he wasn't where he claimed to be. He entered the house without speaking, walked straight to the study, and locked the door behind him. That was the 5th time this week. Ifeanyi, once the darling of society columns and fashion blogs, now paced the hallway of her own home like a ghost. She tried to tell herself it was just stress, a phase. But the change in him was undeniable. He was distant, cold, and worst of all, secretive. That night, she stood outside the study door, pressed her ear gently against the wood, and heard him whispering a name in the dark. Amaka. I'm sorry. The next morning, Ngozi arrived unannounced, her face composed but her tone icy. We need to talk, she said, walking past Ifeanyi into the sitting room. He went back to her, she added without pause. Ifeanyi blinked. Back to who? But she already knew. Ngozi sat with regal calm. That village girl, the one he met in university. She's here. She has a daughter. And that daughter, I suspect, is his. Ifeanyi dropped into a seat, stunned. He cheated on me, she whispered. Ngozi scoffed. Cheating implies consent. This was before you. Before everything. But the danger is not in the affair. It's in what that girl represents. Poverty, scandal, weakness. That girl almost destroyed him once. I won't let it happen again. Ifeanyi, heart-pounding, asked the only question that mattered. What are we going to do? Ngozi's smile was sharp and cold. We're going to remind him who he is. And we're going to erase her all over again. This time, permanently. As Obina stood in the guest room that night, gazing at an old photo he found of his university days, the storm he tried to hold back finally crashed in his chest. Amaka's face lingered behind his eyelids every time he blinked. Chisholm's smile echoed in his mind. His daughter. His daughter. How many birthdays had he missed? How many school events, scraped knees, and first words had slipped by while he sat in conference rooms and gala events? He didn't care what his mother said. He didn't care what Ifeanyi felt. The time for silence was over. The next morning, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd call again. The office of his family's personal doctor. I need a DNA test, he said, privately, and I already have the girl's sample. He hung up and whispered to himself, they stole my memories, but I won't let them steal my daughter.
Amaka stood by the window, her hands trembling as she watched Chisholm braid her hair in the yard, laughing with a neighbor's child. The sound brought a soft ache to her heart, the kind that reminded her how hard she'd fought to preserve that laughter. But today, it didn't feel enough. Something about Obina's visit had shaken her to her core. She had locked the door on him to protect herself, but the storm inside her had been raging ever since. How did he find her? Why now? And more importantly, did he truly forget her? Or was this all part of some cruel game orchestrated by his mother? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dusty floor, when a knock startled her back to the present. It wasn't soft. It wasn't tentative. It was persistent. Reluctantly, she opened the door, and there he stood again. No guards. No black SUV. Just Obina. And pain in his eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. I'm not leaving until you talk to me, Obina said, stepping closer. I don't want to fight. I want to know the truth. Amaka said nothing at first. She studied his face, the lines that hadn't been there before, the tiredness in his eyes. But beneath it all, she saw something genuine. You want the truth? She asked quietly, stepping aside. Then come in and sit. Obina entered the modest room. It smelled of soap, fabric, and memory. She gestured for him to sit while she poured water into a glass and handed it to him. Then she began, slowly, softly, painting the picture of the night she last saw him. The accident, the hospital, the threats, the screams, the bribe Ngozi offered her to disappear. I was 3 weeks pregnant when I left, she said, her voice cracking. And I left because your mother said if I didn't, she would make sure no one in this country hired me again. She said she'd call me a witch, a gold digger, a murderer. And when I saw the police escort at the hospital doors, I knew she wasn't bluffing. Obinna sat frozen, his mouth parted slightly, the glass untouched in his hand. Each word she spoke was like a whip cracking through his constructed history. I didn't remember anything, he said hoarsely. They told me you left me, they said you used me. I believed them, because I had no memories to fight back with. Amaka looked at him, her expression unreadable. And what do you believe now? She asked. Obinna stood and walked slowly toward the window, where Chisholm was still laughing in the distance. I believe I've been living someone else's life, he whispered. I believe she's mine. And I believe you were the only real thing I ever had. Amaka's breath caught. Years of tears swelled behind her eyes. But she didn't cry. She had cried too much already. You can't just come back and fix everything, Obinna, she said. This isn't a fairy tale. He turned to her, eyes moist. I'm not here to fix the past. I'm here because I need to be in her future. The next morning, Obinna met Chisholm at the town square, where she was helping paint a mural for a community youth program. She looked up from the scaffolding, surprised to see him again. You really don't give up, do you? She said with a light laugh, wiping her paint-stained hands on a cloth. Obinna smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can we talk? He asked, motioning toward a shaded bench. Chisholm hesitated, but something in his voice made her nod. As they sat, he stared at her wrist. The bracelet shimmered again, the very same piece that had once sealed his young heart to her mother's. There's something you need to know, he began. About your mother and me. Chisholm's smile faded. She listened intently as he spoke, halting at first, then with more confidence, explaining how he and Amaka had loved each other, how he had an accident, lost his memory, and was told she had vanished. He left out the worst details, the coma, the threats, the manipulation, but said enough for the truth to crack the air between them. Chisholm was silent for a long time. So, you think I'm your daughter? She said slowly. No. I know you are, Obinna said. I've already submitted the DNA test. We'll have the results soon, but in my heart, I already know. Chisholm laughed, but it wasn't joyful. It was bitter, confused, raw. All these years, I asked my mom who he was. She always said he was gone. She said he couldn't come back. Her voice dropped. I used to think maybe he was dead. Or maybe he didn't care. Obinna clenched his fists. She was trying to protect you from all this. From them. Chisholm blinked. From who? Obinna hesitated. From the people who would rather rewrite history than admit they were wrong. My mother, my wife, my world was built on lies. Chisholm stood abruptly. You don't get to play hero now, she said, voice rising. You don't get to show up in a suit, tell me I'm your daughter, and think everything will be fine. I've lived 19 years without a father. I don't know what to do with one now. Obinna rose to follow her. I don't expect forgiveness, Chisholm. I just want a chance. Just one chance to be there for you. She turned slowly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'll talk to my mum, she said. But don't expect her to welcome you with open arms. He nodded. I know. I wouldn't either. As she walked away, he sat back down on the bench, burying his face in his hands. He had opened the door to truth, but now came the hardest part, rebuilding what had been stolen by silence. A daughter who didn't know how to trust him. A woman who once loved him but now only saw a stranger. And a mother, Ngozi, who would soon realize her grip on the past was slipping fast. He didn't know what storm was coming next. But one thing was certain. The truth was finally awake, and it would not go back to sleep. When Ngozi received the call from one of her discreet informants in Umidam, she was seated at her garden table, sipping hibiscus tea and flipping through the society pages of a glossy magazine. Ma, the voice crackled, he's been meeting with a girl. And the woman. He went back today again. The cup dropped from her hand, smashing into the tiled floor. Her eyes narrowed, her blood roared. She stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from her wrapper as if she were preparing for battle. Get the driver, she snapped. We're going to that wretched town. The ride was silent. Her fingers clutched the armrest like talons. Her mind swirled with memories of Amaka, the stubborn girl who had almost destroyed everything she built. The girl who seduced her son and filled his head with rebellion. I buried that girl, she muttered aloud. I buried that girl with my bare hands. How dare she rise again? Upon arrival, she marched through the dusty path to the bungalow and banged on the door. Amaka opened it, immediately paling. You, Ngozi said with venom. You filthy curse of a woman. Amaka straightened, the years having forged steel in her spine. I'm not scared of you anymore, she said calmly. You should be, Ngozi spat. Because I will end you, Amaka. Just like I should have the first time. You already tried, Amaka replied. You failed. The air was electric with hatred. You think just because my son remembers you, you'll slither your way back into his life? Into our family? Ngozi hissed. Let me remind you, I own that family, and you are not welcome in it. Amaka stepped closer, eyes blazing. He's not your puppet anymore, and Chisholm is his daughter. Nothing you do will change that. Before Ngozi could reply, Obina's car pulled in. He stepped out, paused when he saw them, then walked over with calm fury in his eyes. Mama, he said, it's over. Ngozi turned to him, shocked. You're choosing her over your own blood? After everything I've done for you? Obina's voice was cold. You didn't do it for me. You did it to control me. You buried the truth and called it love. But I remember now, and I won't let you destroy what little I have left of the truth. Ngozi's lips quivered, then curled into a tight smile. You think this is the end? You think love and memory will save you, she whispered. You have no idea what I'm capable of. With that, she turned and stormed back to her car, leaving behind a silence that hung in the air like smoke. But behind her warning was the promise of war, and Obina, for the first time, wasn't afraid to fight.
Obina stood in his private office, the DNA envelope heavy in his hand. The doctor had personally delivered the results in a sealed packet, eyes betraying nothing. But his silence had screamed the answer Obina already knew. He could hear the air conditioner hum faintly above, the city buzzing far below, but inside it was as though the world had gone completely still. He peeled open the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out the single sheet of paper that would forever shift the axis of his life. His eyes scanned the words, and then he saw it, probability of paternity, 99.99%. His knees gave way, and he sank into his chair, the paper clutched tightly to his chest. Tears gathered, unbidden, clouding his vision. For a moment, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man who had been robbed, of birthdays, of scraped knees, of first dances, of school report cards proudly held up by a little girl he never knew he had. The guilt washed over him like a tsunami. 19 years. 19 years she had grown without him, learning to crawl, to walk, to speak. Had she ever asked where her father was? Had she cried at night, hoping he would appear? Had she wondered why he abandoned her? Obina buried his face in his palms, the paper crumpling in his grip. How many times had he stood on stages, delivering speeches about legacy and family values, while his own child watched him through a flickering TV screen, unaware she was the very flesh of that legacy. He thought of Amaka, what she must have gone through, carrying their child in secret, alone and afraid. How many nights had she stared at that bracelet, the one he gave her, wondering if the man who promised forever had truly vanished. He could feel the weight of their suffering now, two lives caught in the shadows of a lie. After hours of silence, he finally stood and looked at his reflection in the mirror. Gone was the confident tycoon. What stared back was a man raw with regret, but burning with a new purpose. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into a leather envelope. Then, for the first time in his life, he penned a handwritten letter, one for Chisholm and one for Amaka. In it, he didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He simply told the truth, that he had been lied to, that he remembered her now, that every day he missed was a wound that would never fully heal, that he would wait as long as it took for the chance to show her, both of them, what love looked like when it finally came back home. It was dusk when Chisholm returned from the library to find her mother seated on the veranda, staring into nothing. There was an envelope clutched in her lap, and her eyes were swollen, not from crying, but from something deeper, collapse. Chisholm approached cautiously. "Mummy," she asked, "are you okay?" Amaka looked up, startled, as if seeing her daughter for the first time. She held out the letter, without a word. Chisholm took it, opened it slowly, and read the contents in silence. The DNA report was clear. The handwritten letter beneath it was even clearer. It was Obina's handwriting, formal, elegant, but filled with unmistakable remorse. When she finished reading, she stood there for several minutes, the words dancing in her head like wind through broken glass. "You knew," she finally said, her voice cold. "You knew he was my father, and you lied to me." Amaka stood, her eyes shining with emotion. "I didn't lie," she whispered. "I protected you." Chisholm's lip trembled. "Protected me from what? From knowing who I was? From knowing the truth?" Her voice cracked, rising with every word. "You let me believe he didn't care. You made me feel unwanted for years. I hated him, and he didn't even know I existed." Amaka moved to hold her, but Chisholm stepped back. "You had no right," she said. "No right to make that decision alone." Amaka swallowed the sob, threatening to erupt. "I was 21. I had no job, no family, and no power. His mother swore to destroy me. I did what I thought was best." Chisholm's voice dropped to a pained whisper. "Then why didn't you tell me when I turned 18? Or 15? Or even yesterday?" Amaka fell silent. There was no answer that would soothe the daughter, denied her father for nearly 2 decades. Chisholm stormed inside, slamming the door behind her. Amaka stood alone in the fading light, her soul fraying at the edges. Inside, Chisholm collapsed onto her bed, clutching the bracelet now with a new awareness. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was proof of a life that had been hidden from her, a name that should have been hers, a man who wasn't a villain after all. Her tears finally fell, silently soaking her pillow. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear everything apart, but she stayed still. For the first time in her life, Chisholm wasn't just a girl from Umidum. She was the daughter of a man whose name echoed in city towers, and the child of a mother whose silence now felt like betrayal. And as the moon rose high and full, it bore witness to a young woman's identity breaking and rebuilding in the same breath. When Ifunanya stumbled across the DNA result envelope tucked inside Obina's briefcase, she knew her marriage had officially ended. She had suspected, of course. The late-night absences, the quiet glances at his phone, the name Amaka echoing down the hallways when he thought she was asleep. But this was betrayal laid out in black and white. Chisholm wasn't just another woman's daughter. She was his. And worse, Obina had known. He had known and chosen not to tell her. Not even after she stood by him for 10 years, smiled at parties, built his brand, and bore the shame of being a billionaire's wife with no children. Rage boiled inside her, not just at Obina, but at Amaka, that nameless village girl who now threatened to ruin everything she had worked for. Ifunanya was not about to go quietly. She didn't suffer in silence. She fought. That evening, she booked an exclusive interview with a gossip journalist known for her ruthless headlines. Sitting in a dimly lit studio, Ifunanya let the cameras roll. She painted herself as the abandoned wife of a billionaire who had reconnected with a former village flame, and was now pursuing a secret child he fathered while still married. Her voice was smooth, calculated, every word designed to wound. She spoke of betrayal, of humiliation, of a woman, herself, discarded like yesterday's trash, while her husband embraced the child of a woman who once nearly ruined his future. "They say love is blind," she said dramatically. "But what kind of love turns a man against the family that built him?" The video hit social media within hours and exploded across platforms. Hashtags began trending. Rumors flew like wild bees. Hashtag Obina exposed. Hashtag affair baby. Hashtag wife speaks out. Obina's phone rang nonstop. Shareholders demanded answers. Reporters camped outside his office. Even his board of trustees threatened to withdraw support from the Obina Foundation. The empire he had built on discipline and discretion was suddenly unraveling, not because of lies, but because of truth. And at the center of it all was a young girl with a bracelet, and a woman with secrets too long kept. Ifeanyi, satisfied, poured herself a drink that night and toasted to her own vengeance. "Let them drown in their little love story," she whispered to the mirror. But what she didn't realize was this: love born of truth doesn't drown. It learns to breathe under fire. And while the world mocked Obinna and questioned Amaka's dignity, something stronger than shame was quietly taking root, a bond not even public disgrace could destroy. The backlash from Ifeanyi's explosive interview didn't just stop at media gossip. It opened a door that Ngozi had long believed sealed shut. With every repost, every trending hashtag, journalists dug deeper into the scandal, desperate for the real story behind the billionaire, the mystery woman, and the secret child. One reporter in particular, a former intern from the Obinna Foundation named Adiz, remembered whispers from hospital staff years ago during her time researching Obinna's early recovery. Driven by instinct, she returned to the now-defunct UD General Hospital, where Obinna had been treated 2 decades ago. After days of persistence, she tracked down a retired nurse named Madame Beatrice, frail but sharp-tongued, who still remembered the frightened girl named Amaka and the powerful woman who made her disappear. That woman, Beatrice had said, didn't even flinch when she threatened to ruin that girl's life. She bribed the hospital, made sure no one recorded Amaka's name on the final file. We were told to erase her from everything. The revelation was gold for Adiz. She compiled witness statements, uncovered inconsistencies in the hospital logs, and discovered a forged discharge record with Amaka's name replaced. Within 48 hours, her exposé was online, buried truths. How Obinna's mother erased his first love. The article went viral within minutes. The internet, which had previously vilified Amaka and ridiculed Chisholm as the product of an affair, suddenly shifted. Sympathy surged. Hashtag Justice for Amaka began trending. People demanded to know how a mother could silence a young woman, hide a child, and manipulate her own son's recovery, all in the name of pride and power. NGO leaders and women's rights organizations spoke out. Even former business partners of Ngozi released statements condemning the abuse of influence. Ngozi's carefully polished reputation, which she had nurtured over decades with photo ops and philanthropic gestures, began to crumble like sand under a rising tide. Obinna read the article in silence. His hands trembled, but not from shock, from rage. He had suspected his mother's hand in Amaka's disappearance, but this was intentional sabotage. She hadn't just lied. She had destroyed a family before it even began. He confronted her that night at the family estate. She sat in her velvet chair, wrapped in pride, still trying to wield authority. But this time, Obinna didn't flinch. "You didn't protect me," he said through clenched teeth. "You stole from me. You stole from her." Ngozi scoffed, her voice sharp. "I gave you the life you deserved. She would have ruined you." "You ruined me," Obinna snapped. "You buried the only person who ever loved me without a price tag." She rose slowly, defiance in her eyes. "And what will you do now? Tear down the house I built?" He stepped back, his voice ice. "No, Mama. I'll rebuild my own." And with that he turned and walked away, not just from the house, but from everything it stood for. The fallout from the exposé turned Obinna's world upside down, but for the first time in his life, he welcomed the chaos. His phone buzzed incessantly with requests for comments, damage control strategies, and board meetings, but he silenced them all. The board of directors at Obinna Holdings demanded an emergency session, worried that the scandal would affect market trust. Obinna stood before them not as the polished tycoon they once praised, but as a man stripped of public armor. "I won't apologize for finding my daughter," he said, calm but unshaken. "If the truth is bad for business, then maybe we've been doing business wrong." Some board members exchanged glances, uneasy. Others nodded in quiet admiration. He handed in his resignation as CEO of one of his companies that same day, delegating control to trusted hands. Then he stepped out of the glass tower he once ruled, not in defeat, but in liberation. Back home, Ifeanyi's belongings were already being packed. She didn't fight him this time. She had said what she wanted to say, publicly, venomously, and now the sting had recoiled on her. Sponsors pulled out of her fashion label. Clients distanced themselves. A few supporters still defended her, calling her a wife betrayed. But the narrative had shifted. She sat on the staircase, makeup-free, hair undone, sipping wine with tired eyes. "You never really loved me," she said as he passed. He stopped. "I tried," he answered honestly. "But I was never whole. You fell in love with a man who didn't know who he was." "And now that you do?" she asked bitterly. He looked at her. "Now I owe it to the ones I lost." He walked away, leaving behind the last piece of a life his mother had designed for him. A life built on control, status, and silence, now dismantled brick by brick. A few days later, Obinna visited Amaka again, this time with no speech, no request. Just presence. She opened the door slowly, unsure of what to expect. He handed her an envelope, not filled with money or promises, but with legal documents, an educational trust fund for Chisholm, property transfer papers for a flat in Enugu, and a handwritten apology. "I'm not here to ask you to come back to me," he said. "I'm here to give you what I should have given you 19 years ago, respect." Amaka said nothing for a long while. Her fingers trembled as she scanned the documents. "I don't want your money, Obinna," she finally whispered. "Then don't take it for you," he replied. "Take it for her. She deserves everything the world tried to deny her." Amaka looked up at him, and for the first time, something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar tremble of healing. Amaka sat alone that evening, the documents spread before her on the table like the fragments of a dream she once buried. She traced the curve of Obinna's signature with her finger, eyes blinking back the weight of everything it meant. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about being seen, about not being erased, about her daughter growing up with dignity and recognition. She thought about all the years she had struggled, sewing clothes late into the night, skipping meals so Chisholm could eat, turning down help because pride wouldn't let her beg. And now here was the man who vanished, or rather, was taken, offering restoration, not with flattery or smooth words, but with truth. And truth, for all its rough edges, had finally cut through her fear. Still, forgiveness wasn't easy. Healing wasn't a button. It was a process. And Amaka was only just beginning. Chisholm, still wounded by the secret her mother kept, barely spoke at dinner. The silence between them had grown longer in recent days, stretching like a rope pulled taut, threatening to snap. "I'm sorry," Amaka said suddenly. Chisholm looked up, startled. "Not just for hiding the truth, but for thinking I had to bear the pain alone." Chisholm didn't answer at first. Then she said quietly, "I wanted to hate him, but I can't." Amaka nodded. "You don't have to choose between us. I just need you to know everything I did to protect you." Chisholm's expression softened. "I believe you," she said, "but I need time." "Take all the time you need," Amaka replied. "Just don't shut me out forever." That night, Chisholm placed the bracelet back in its box. Not out of rejection, but out of transition. It no longer symbolized loss. It now symbolized a history finally being reclaimed. The next day, Obinna texted Amaka, asking if she would accompany Chisholm to her university admission ceremony. Amaka hesitated for several minutes before replying, "Yes, but I'll stand at the back." Obinna replied, "No, you stand with us." When they arrived at the university gates, students whispered and gawked. Cameras clicked. But none of it mattered. Chisholm stood proudly between her mother and father, both broken, both mended, both present. The applause was thunderous when she received her certificate. And as they posed for a photograph, the bracelet sparkled on her wrist under the midday sun, not as a relic of a forgotten past, but as a testament to truth, endurance, and the family that refused to stay buried. Obinna hadn't expected healing to come quickly, and it didn't. There were days when Chisholm barely replied to his texts, and others when she sent him pictures of her university dorm room or voice notes filled with excitement about her first classes. It was uneven, unpredictable, but real, and Obinna embraced it. He began showing up without fanfare, driving her to school, bringing her lunch, even helping her carry her laundry. He listened more than he spoke, and slowly, the tension that once weighed down their interactions began to fade. Chisholm, once guarded and sharp, started smiling more freely around him. She asked questions about his childhood, laughed at his awkwardness, and one day, after a long walk through the campus garden, she called him Dad, not by accident, but with intent. He didn't cry in front of her, but when he returned to his car that evening, he wept into the steering wheel like a child reclaiming the fatherhood he never thought he'd know. His relationship with Amaka, however, moved at a different pace. She remained reserved, always polite, always watchful. Obinna understood. It wasn't about lack of love, it was about memory. While he had lost 20 years in forgetfulness, she had lived through every moment of abandonment, betrayal, and pain with full awareness. She had held their child through fevers, tears, heartbreak, and celebrations, alone. The wound wasn't just emotional, it was cellular. But Obinna never rushed her. He kept his distance, respected her silence, and when he spoke, it was always with humility. He began investing quietly in local schools and tailors' cooperatives in Umidum, not for credit, but because he knew it would support the world that raised Amaka when he could not. She noticed. And though she never said it, she began to see not the boy who left her, but the man who was finally trying to become worthy. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Amaka invited him for a quiet meal. It was the first time she had done so without Chisholm being home. They sat in the small living room, plates of jollof rice between them, thunder rumbling in the distance. After a long silence, she looked up and said, "You've changed." Obinna smiled faintly. "I think I just remembered who I was supposed to be." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I can ever trust completely again." Obinna reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to place a small box in front of her. "I don't want you to promise me anything," he said softly. "I just want you to open this when you're ready." She didn't open it right away. But that night, alone in her room, Amaka untied the ribbon and found the original bracelet, restored, polished, with her name engraved in tiny cursive script underneath. She held it for a long time, eyes closed, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. A year had passed. The world had moved on from the scandal. Social media found new headlines, and the gossip blogs no longer whispered about the billionaire, the village girl, and their love child. But for Obinna, Amaka, and Chisholm, the journey was still unfolding, no longer as a tragedy, but as something reborn. Chisholm was thriving in university, excelling academically, mentoring other young girls from rural communities, and even starting a blog where she wrote about identity, healing, and hidden truths. She called it The Bracelet's Voice. Her following grew rapidly, and soon, young women all over the country were sharing their own stories of abandonment, strength, and survival. She didn't write to shame anyone. She wrote to reclaim her story. And it worked. Her voice, once silenced by secrecy, now carried into boardrooms, classrooms, and government panels. She was no longer just the girl with the bracelet. She was a voice for daughters of silence. Obinna, now semi-retired from the corporate world, had shifted his focus entirely to the Obinna Foundation. But this time, the mission wasn't about handshakes and headlines. It was about grassroots transformation. He opened a scholarship fund named after Amaka's late father, a man he never met, but whose spirit lived through the woman who raised their child alone. He spoke at events, not as a flawless billionaire, but as a man who had fallen, lost himself, and dared to start again. And Amaka? She had begun teaching again, not just tailoring, but storytelling. She led workshops for single mothers, teaching them not only how to sew, but how to survive with dignity. She didn't wear flashy clothes or live in a mansion. But in every stitch she guided, in every word she spoke, she was a monument to endurance. And though she hadn't said the words, "I forgive you" aloud, her actions made it clear. She had chosen to let go of bitterness, not for him, but for herself. On the anniversary of Chisholm's blog launch, the three of them gathered quietly at her campus for a small dinner. No media, no photographers, just them. Chisholm stood up during the toast and said, "I was born from silence, but I've learned to speak." She raised her glass to her mother, to the woman who never gave up. then to her father, and to the man who found his way back. Obinna and Amaka exchanged a glance, not romantic, but full of meaning. Later that night, as they walked to the car, Chisholm slipped the bracelet from her wrist and placed it gently in her mother's hand. "It started with you," she said. "It belongs with you." Amaka stared down at it, tears welling. Obinna stepped closer. "Let's never forget again," he whispered. And under the quiet moonlight, the three of them stood together, not perfect, not whole, but real. A family rebuilt from ashes, bound by truth, by love, and by the bracelet that remembered what time tried to erase. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.